this is the story of the first game that I ever looked back on and called one of my favorite games. Sure, I had been playing video games for a few years at this point in the year 2000, but they weren't really anything other than simple entertainment to me until this point. I looked at them in the same way that I looked at Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic cards, Razor scooters, and anything Pokemon related, really. I was interested in them at the time, but none of those things followed me into my teenage years, minus Magic cards, which I still played in early high school, but that's not the point. My point is that video games were just another one of those things that I liked. Then came the Sega Dreamcast in 1999. Again, like last week, I want a full episode to dive into the Dreamcast, so we'll just leave it at that I felt myself getting more attached to gaming once I had experienced games like Sonic Adventure, Power Stone, and Air Force Delta. Then came the year 2000. At this point, I was still picking games based off of my friends' recommendations and cool looking cover art, really. I was at my local Toys R Us with my mom, and I think I had enough money for a game, or my mom was treating me, which was very rare. I don't remember the specific reason, but I was in Toys R Us looking for a game, and that's all that really matters. I had grown a bit bored of my Sega Dreamcast as I had 6 months or so to play the games that I got for Christmas. Looking for a new game in the Dreamcast section, I spotted this game with some extremely colorful looking cover art that depicted 2 skater punks with spray paint cans, with the title of the game looking like it was sprayed out of said cans. The game was called Jet Grind Radio. I looked at the back cover and saw that the basic premise of the game was that you ride on rollerblades and paint the town in graffiti. Just based on the cover art alone, and the fact that I already loved playing Tony Hawk 2, I knew that I really wanted this game, so I brought it over to my mom, who gave it a pretty firm no. Needless to say, I was a bit heartbroken as I had my sights set on this game, and now I had to try and find something else. Granted, I ended up picking Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64, which was a good choice at the time, and I stress at the time, but I really wanted Jet Grind Radio. So we left Toys R Us and stopped at Sears so my mom could pick some things up. This was a typical shopping day for my mom and I, so like always, I took off to the video game section while she went shopping elsewhere. There I spotted a Dreamcast kiosk which had, you guessed it, Jet Grind Radio playing on it. So I grabbed the controller and started playing in a section where you did a little spray painting, but mostly just doing tricks in this half pipe. At one point, my mom came over and asked me what I was playing. I told her it was the game that I wanted back at Toys R Us and turned back to the game. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Oh, well, this is okay. The cover made it look worse than this." Graffiti was a bad thing to my mom, I guess, but regardless, I got super excited and asked her if we could return Smash Brothers to pick up Jet Grind Radio, which got me the yes. Had we not stopped at that Sears after Toys R Us that day, I don't know if I would be making this video, for reasons that I'll explain later. I don't even know if I would be as big of a gamer as I am today had this game not found me at that exact time. Granted, it's not all or nothing with me, so maybe another game would have come along, but this is the one that did it for me. Jet Grind Radio was, for me, the perfect blend of gameplay, aesthetic, and soundtrack. The game was developed by a newly formed team in Japan working for Sega called Smilebit. In interviews with the creators of the game, they explained that Japan in the late 90s had this very strong culture associated with vibrant colors and an awesome mix of rock and DJ music scenes. They really wanted to emanate that with Jet Grind Radio, or what was called Jet Set Radio everywhere outside of the US, so they designed a world where rival gangs paint the fictional city of Tokyo-to with graffiti. While Tokyo-to was obviously based on Tokyo, the team also took a lot of inspiration from New York City and integrated that both into 2 levels in the game which were heavily inspired by New York City and the general verticality of the design of most of the levels. To round out the game, Smilebit approached a wide array of musicians to contribute music from rock to hip-hop to J-pop to metal to acid jazz and trip-hop. The most memorable contribution to this game was by a man named Hideki Naganuma, who contributed a large portion of the game's soundtrack. Needless to say, Naganuma's music made this game for most. Quick little aside here, you may have noticed that this gameplay looks a little too good to be Dreamcast footage, and you're right. I used the 2012 release of Jet Set Radio HD on Steam to capture this footage as, well, here's the Dreamcast footage I took. Yeah, I like the Steam version better too. The only issue with this version is it's missing 2 songs from the original release, but that's not really a big deal. Also, from here on out, I'm just going to refer to the game as Jet Set Radio instead of Jet Grind Radio in order to avoid confusion. So, Jet Set Radio starts with a narration from the all-knowing DJ Professor K, who explains the situation. The game never explicitly gives a time period, but it's kind of around 1999 or 2000, and a group of teenagers on rollerblades powered by new Netrium batteries are painting the streets of Tokyo-to with graffiti. These teens are named Rudies by the people of Tokyo-to. In response to this, the government, in conjunction with the shady conglomerate, the Rokaku Group, founded the 21st Century Project, which aims to use harsh police crackdowns on the Rudies. In the midst of all this chaos, a new gang of Rudies called the Gigis is formed to take on the already established rival gangs the Love Shockers, Poison Jam, and the Noise Tanks. The story starts out as a turf war between these four groups, with the Noise Tanks and Poison Jam occupying nearby neighborhoods and the Love Shockers attacking you directly at home. You can choose which group to go after first, heck, you could even stop after one mission and change targets. Each territory has 3 missions where you tag the entire area in graffiti while trying to avoid the cops. The cops don't just have nightsticks though, they go all out with things like helicopters, tanks, and paratroopers. During all of this, the police chief is even chasing you around with a giant magnum gun, which he actually shoots at you. Seriously, what kind of messed up future is this? During this time, other Rudies start hearing about your adventures as the GGs and show up at your hideout to try and get into the gang. In order to unlock them, you have to either beat them in a race or do this weird version of Horse where you copy their moves exactly. I remember as a kid having a lot of trouble with Graham, as his last move involved grinding and jumping across this giant sewer chasm and then wall riding all in one move. Granted, I can do this as an adult now, but that's only because I've done it so many times. Most of them are pretty easy though, so you'll have more people to play as before you know it. After the 3 missions are done, you unlock a level where you chase gang members through their territory, tagging their backs with graffiti. After 10 tags, that gang member is knocked out. This admittedly makes absolutely no sense. Why does graffiti cause the gang member to stop in their tracks? What is it, like graffiti laced with tranquilizer or something? Granted, I guess they wanted to show that the GGs were better people than the cops, so we weren't shooting at them, and also this game was probably trying to keep its T rating. After defeating the 3 gangs, you notice that each gang has a piece of a broken record that, when put together, form a picture of a demon. You also notice that a member of Poison Jam is picked up by a mysterious black car with very little explanation. On top of that, almost on cue, 2 new people show up at your hideout from a city called Grind City, which is this game's equivalent of New York City, and they want to join the GGs. After they join up with you, these 2 new skaters by the names Combo and Cube tell you their story. About 2 months ago in Grind City, weird men in black suits called the Golden Rhinos, who look like 70s mobsters, showed up and started covering all of their graffiti. On top of that, their friend Coin went missing. From there, you play 2 missions as Combo and Cube as they attempt to re-tag the spots covered by the Golden Rhinos. Instead of bringing tanks and paratroopers to the party, the Golden Rhinos actually bring specialized assassins. That's right, assassins, who attack you when you try to tag. After these 2 missions, it cuts back to the present day where the Golden Rhinos have now taken over Tokyo-to, so it's up to the GGs to fight back. You manage to reclaim your territory, but in the process, the demon record gets stolen by the Golden Rhinos. This leads to the final boss fight against the leader of the Golden Rhinos, who is also the head of the Rokaku group, as he attempts to summon a demon with said record. Yeah, it's a pretty goofy premise, admittedly. After a somewhat short boss fight, you vanquish the Rokaku group leader, and Tokyo-to once again belongs to the GGs. While I can't say that the story of Jet Set Radio is a masterpiece by any means, it is a fun story, and in a game this outlandish, that's totally fine. After playing the game again now in the present day though, I could say that the gameplay doesn't always hold up. Particularly towards the end of the game, the flaws in Jet Set Radio's design start to show themselves. First off, the races. The races in Jet Set Radio are kind of frustrating as the game only gives you a vague idea of where the race ends. For context, to end the race, you have to tag a certain spot in the city before your opponent does. As a kid, I actually had to follow my opponent to the spot and let them win in order to memorize where it was. Playing through again now, I could basically remember where everything was, but that was only because I played this game more times than I can possibly count. Another pain point pops up in the form of traversal issues, as I was noticing myself missing more jumps and grinds in the later levels. While the game is pretty forgiving, you can eventually run out of health, which will cause you to have to do the level over again. Also, the boss fight contains some sections where it would have been real nice to have a boost of some kind, as you need a decent amount of momentum to finish the fight. Thankfully, that particular thing is fixed in the sequel, but that's for another video. Regardless of my issues with it, whenever I'm asked to list my favorite games of all time, Jet Set Radio always comes up. Jet Set Radio still has an awesome cel-shaded aesthetic, rocking soundtrack, and somewhat solid gameplay that perhaps has not aged as well as others, but I can still say that I adore this game. After finishing this game as a kid, I realized that I was going to be playing video games for a very long time. The funny thing is, had my mom not allowed me to get this game back then maybe, quite possibly, I would have developed a completely different hobby. Of course, that's speculation, but it is interesting to think about. Regardless, that is the story of my first favorite game. Let me know in the comments what your first favorite game was. Also, this is part of a crossover that I'm doing with my good buddy JawaJosh, who should have a video about Skies of Arcadia going up right around the time of this video. I'll leave his channel link at the end so you can check that out too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.